Hello, first graders. I'm very excited today because today I'm going to start reading our next A to Z mystery. We finished the panda puzzle. Hopefully you watched that video. I hope you liked that book. And now we're on to the quicksand question. We're on to Q already. So I'm going to read the back of it first. Everyone in Green Lawn is in a quake about the ducks that keep crossing River Road. Just when the town raises enough cash to build a special duck bridge, the money is stolen. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose are on a quest to find the culprit, but to catch their quarry, the kids will have to go wading through quicksand. Very exciting. So let's start the quicksand question. Chapter 1. Looks like they're in Josh's barn. Remember that Josh has a barn and he got to keep Polly the pony from the other book. What one is that? The one with the painting. Oh, the Orange Outlaw. Anyway, chapter 1. It was a Saturday night. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were having a sleepover in Josh's barn. Dink tipped a jar full of coins onto the sleeping bag. "I can't believe the duck bank is nearly full," he said. "I know," Ruth Rose said, emptying her piggy bank. "We've been saving for a whole year." "Quiet, you two," Josh said, stacking nickels, dimes, and quarters on his sleeping bag. "I can't count if you're talking." The duck bank was a large plastic bank shaped like a duck that stood in the fire station on Main Street. It was 4 feet tall and made of clear plastic. Everyone in town had been dropping money into it. They were going to use the money to pay for a special bridge just for ducks. For years, mother ducks had been crossing River Road to build nests in the woods near Bridge Lane. After their ducklings were born, the mother ducks would lead their ducklings back across the road to the river. The problem was, the little ducks were hard to see. Many drivers had almost had accidents. Finally, the town held a meeting to decide what to do. One person suggested hiring a duck crossing guard. A man who had almost driven off the road wanted the ducks rounded up and put in cages. Another person suggested digging a tunnel under River Road. But a girl from Dink's school had the best idea. "My grandparents feed ducks in their yard in Florida," she'd explained. "The ducks have to cross a busy street, so my grandfather built a little bridge. My grandmother sprinkled corn on the bridge to let the ducks know it was for them. Now the ducks use the bridge all the time." Everyone loved the idea. Mr. Plank, the shop teacher at the high school, raised his hand. "The kids in my class can design the bridge," he said. "When we've collected enough money, I'll help them build it." Now the bank was nearly full. On Monday morning, the money would be counted by Mr. Fiscal, the president of Green Lawn Savings Bank. As soon as school let out the next week, Mr. Plank and the high school kids would start building the bridge. Josh finished counting his money. $9.10, he said. He rubbed his stomach. "Money makes me hungry." He grabbed his backpack and pulled out a tin of chocolate chip cookies. He also had some apples, carrots, and dog biscuits. Here's a picture of his backpack. And it's not just money that makes him hungry, we know. Everything makes him hungry. In her stall, Polly the pony lay sleeping in a pile of hay. Josh's dog Pal was curled up next to her. Outside, June crickets were chirping in the field behind the barn. "I've got $10.22, Dink said. "What about you, Ruth Rose?" $14.30, Ruth Rose said. "How much do you suppose is in the duck bank?" Ruth Rose liked to wear all one color. Tonight her outfit matched her sleeping bag. She wore lime green shorts and t-shirt. "A lot," Josh said. "It's up to the duck's neck. And the 3 of us are putting in over $30. He opened the tin of cookies, took 2 for himself, and passed the rest to Ruth Rose. "We should think of a name for the bridge," he said. "How about Waddle Way?" He kicked off his sneakers and slipped into his sleeping bag. Dink switched off his flashlight. "How about calling it Duck Drive?" "How about Critter Crossing?" Ruth Rose said. "I like that," Dink said, yawning. Josh shut off his flashlight. He snorted. "Critter Crossing, Ruth Rose? Gee, why not call it Bunny Bridge?" Ruth Rose laughed in the dark barn. "Critter Crossing is good because other animals might use the bridge," she said. "Bunnies, turtles, raccoons, buffalo," Josh added. After a few minutes, the kids drifted off to sleep. Polly whinnied softly in her stall. Pal snored in a pile of hay. Much later, something woke Dink. He sat up in his sleeping bag. Next to him, Josh and Ruth Rose were only lumps in the darkness. Then Dink heard Polly stamp her hooves. When his eyes adjusted, he could see that the white pony was standing. Pal was awake too. Dink crawled out of his sleeping bag and walked over to the animals. He stroked Polly's warm nose. "What is it, girl?" he whispered. Polly snorted and shook her mane. Dink knelt and scratched Pal behind his ears. "Bet you just had a bad dream," he murmured. Using his flashlight, Dink checked his watch. It was 1 o'clock and he was wide awake. He pushed the barn door open and walked outside. The night was warm and quiet. Even the crickets were asleep. Josh's house was dark except for a small light over the back door. Dink took a deep breath. The air smelled like the lawn had just been mowed. The springy grass felt cool under his bare feet. He yawned, stretched, and walked around the barn. Behind the barn was a broad meadow. Next to the meadow was River Road, and on the other side was the Indian River. On a sunny day, you could see the light glinting off the river. But now the meadow, the road, and the river were covered in darkness. Dink was about to go back inside when he noticed 2 dots of light in the distance. Car headlights, he thought. What's a car doing in the meadow? Then the lights disappeared. Dink smiled at himself. Of course, the car wasn't in the meadow, it was on River Road. Dink slipped back into the barn, crawled into his sleeping bag, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, Polly began to whinny, and Pal began barking. What's going on? Josh asked groggily. He switched on his flashlight and turned the beam on Polly. Look at her, Ruth Rose said. Polly's eyes were rolling in fright. She rose on her hind legs and kicked at her stall. Pal barked and ran over to Josh. Something's been bugging them, Dink said. They woke me up a little while ago. Then all 3 kids smelled it. Smoke, Josh yelled, kicking his way out of his sleeping bag. The kids ran outside expecting to see something burning, but the night was peaceful and dark. Then Dink walked behind the barn. Guys, over here, he shouted. Josh and Ruth Rose hurried around the corner. Dink pointed toward the river. A small orange blaze flickered in the night. There's a fire in the meadow, Josh said. That's the end of the first chapter. Oh, no. So we read on the back that the money is stolen from the duck bank, but now there's another crime. There's a fire happening. The chapter picture is of the duck bank that's filled up to its neck with coins and such. And the corner picture is of a cute little duck. Chapter 2. It took Greenlawn's fire truck only 5 minutes to get to the fire. Dink and Ruth Rose stood next to the barn. They watched with Josh and his family as the firefighters put out the blaze. I want to go see the fire truck, Josh's brother Bradley announced, wiggling in his father's arms. Afraid not, his dad said. Besides, the fire's out and you're going to bed. No, I want to stay up, Bradley's twin Brian complained. It's time to play. Josh's dad just laughed. Dink looked at his watch. It was about 1:30. Across the meadow, he could see the fire truck's lights. The firefighters' voices sounded muffled. A few minutes later, they saw the fire engine leaving. Soon, the taillights disappeared on River Road. Okay, the excitement's over, Josh's mother said, taking Brian's hand. Back to bed, everyone. You 3 get some sleep, Josh's dad said as he carried Bradley toward the house. Okay, Dad, Josh said. The kids and Pal straggled into the barn. Pal flopped into the hay pile next to Polly again, and the kids climbed into their sleeping bags. Suddenly, Dink popped up. Hey, guys, I just realized something. I may have seen who set the fire, he said. What are you talking about? Asked Josh. Polly woke me up before we smelled the fire, Dink explained. I went out to look around and saw headlights over by the river. Maybe someone was camping, Ruth Rose said. She yawned. We can check in the morning. It's already morning, Dink thought, copying Ruth Rose's yawn. He lay back down. As he was falling asleep, he heard a scratchy sound in the dark. He froze, imagining some night creature crawling over or into his sleeping bag. Then he heard munching, and he smelled cookies. Josh, Dink said, you almost gave me a heart attack. Sorry, Josh said, swallowing. I was hungry. When the kids woke up, sunlight was streaming through the dusty barn window. Birds chirped. The kids kicked out of their sleeping bags and stepped into their sneakers. Let's go see that fire, Josh said. His clothes were wrinkled and his hair stood up in spikes. Pal glazed at Josh with big brown eyes. Okay, you can come too, he said, snapping Pal's leash onto his collar. Ruth Rose fed Polly a carrot, and then they left the barn. The sun peeked through the trees as the kids hiked across the meadow. The tall grass was heavy with dew. Their sneakers and legs were soon soaked. Look, Ruth Rose said, straight ahead, was a soggy pile of blackened wood. The air stunk of smoke and wet ashes. The ground was even wetter here. There were still puddles from the firefighters' hoses. Dink noticed deep footprints in the mushy, trampled grass. Why would someone light a fire here? Josh asked, looking around. They were standing near the edge of River Road. On the other side of the road, a short bank dropped off to the Indian River. Maybe they were roasting marshmallows, Ruth Rose said. She found a long stick and began poking the mess of charred wood and ash. In the middle of the night? Josh asked. Who eats then? Dink laughed. You do, Mr. Cookie Monster. Josh grinned. What's this? Ruth Rose asked. She picked up a hunk of wood and wiped it clean. It was about 6 inches long and 3 inches wide. So, like, this long, maybe? And, like, this wide. Both ends were charred, but the middle hadn't been burned. Stamped into the board with black ink were the letters E-T-C-O. What's E-T-C-O? Josh asked. C-O could be the first 2 letters of Connecticut, Ruth Rose said. Or Colorado, Dink added. I wonder if someone started the fire just to get rid of this, Ruth Rose said, examining the narrow piece of wood. It would be nice to know how many letters got burned off, Dink said. E-T-C-O could be part of a lot of words, like pet comb or wet coat. Or sweet cotton candy, Josh added. The C-O could be short for corporation, Ruth Rose suggested, shoving the wood into her back pocket. I think it stands for get cookies, Josh yelled. He started to run. Last one back to the barn doesn't get any. And that's the end of chapter 2. So the letters, let me see if I can show you. The letters are E-T-C-O, and it looks like it's part of 2 different words. Like the E-T is the ending of one word, and the C-O is the beginning of another word. So I don't know what that could stand for yet. Now we're on chapter 3. Josh burst through the barn doors first. Dink and Ruth Rose barreled in right behind him. Josh immediately pounced on the cookie tin. He opened it, then gasped. Call the cops, he yelled. I've been robbed. Dink grinned at his friend. What'd they take, your brain? Worse, Josh said, peering into the empty cookie tin. They took my cookies. Hey, my piggy bank is missing, Ruth Rose said. I left it right on my sleeping bag. Dink poked his hand into the opening of his sleeping bag. He felt around. My money jar isn't here either, he said. Josh pulled open his sleeping bag. Now I'm really mad, he said. My money sock is gone. Josh looked at his friends. Someone snuck in here while we were gone, he said. Raccoons might have taken the cookies, Ruth Rose said, glancing around the barn. And I read that crows sometimes steal shiny coins, Dink offered. Suddenly, Josh grinned. No, it wasn't raccoons or crows, he said, wiggling his eyebrows. I think it was 2 little monkeys. The twins, shouted Dink and Ruth Rose at the same time. The 3 kids charged out of the barn and raced across the yard. Josh stormed through the kitchen door and yelled, Freeze! Brian and Bradley were kneeling on kitchen chairs, playing with a pile of coins on the table. On the counter were Josh's blue sock, Dink's peanut butter jar, and Ruth Rose's piggy bank. Josh, cried Bradley, look what we found in the barn. It's pirate treasure, yelled Brian. So they solved that crime. It was the twins that took all their things. No, it's not. It's our treasure, Josh growled at his little brothers. Bradley made a face. But we found it. Nobody was there. This is special money, Dink told the twins. We saved it for the ducks. Why do ducks need money? Asked Brian. Ruth Rose explained how the money would be used to build a bridge so the mommy ducks and the baby ducks could cross the road safely. Okay, the twins said together. Now, how about my cookies? Josh asked, waving the cookie tin. Give 'em back. The 2 little boys erupted in giggles. We can't. They're in our stomachs, Brian crowed. The 5 kids ate breakfast, and then Josh told Bradley and Brian to go wake up their parents. Dink scooped up their coins into the cookie tin, while Josh and Ruth Rose cleaned up. Then Josh reached for Pal's leash, but Pal was already sitting by the door with his leash in his mouth. Smart doggy, Josh said as he clipped the leash to Pal's collar. Dink lugged the heavy cookie tin. Pal and the kids took Eagle Lane to Silver Circle and then crossed Main Street to the fire station. They saw Officer Fallon getting out of his cruiser in front of the station. Morning, kids, the police chief said. You're up early. He bent down and stroked Pal's soft ears. Dink held the cookie tin. We came to make a deposit. Officer Fallon grinned. He reached into the cruiser and pulled out a jar of coins. Me too. Did you hear about the fire last night? Ruth Rose asked. Yes, I did, Officer Fallon said. It was small, and I guess the fire department put it out easily. The question is, who started it? I saw a car's headlights near there, Dink reported, but that was before the fire. How long before? Officer Fallon asked. Dink thought back. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so. Officer Fallon set his coin jar on the roof of his cruiser. Then he pulled out his pad, flipped it open, and made a few notes. Could this be a clue? Ruth Rose asked. She pulled the partly burned wood from her pocket. Where'd you find that, Ruth Rose? He asked. We went to the scene of the fire this morning, she told him. This is in the ashes. Officer Fallon examined the 4 letters. C-O is usually short for company, he said, but there should be a period after the O. Maybe the period got burned off, Ruth Rose said. Officer Fallon made a note in his pad. Good detective work, he said to Ruth Rose. Josh's eyes lit up. Maybe the wood was from a snake's cage, he said. Don't pet cobra. They all laughed. Well, let's add our money so we can save those ducks, Officer Fallon said, slipping his notebook into the pocket and reaching for his money jar. And there's a picture. Oh, you can see the wood there, too. They walked into the fire station together. Somewhere a radio played softly. A clock on the rear wall said 9 o'clock. The green lawn fire engine was parked on the concrete floor. Next to it was a smaller truck with rescue written on both doors. On the back were 3 doors. Gray metal lockers stood among the other wall. Below the lockers was a row of rubber boots. Pal walked over and sniffed a boot. Hello, Officer Fallon called out. Anybody home? One of the doors opened. A man wearing a dark blue uniform stepped out. Who's there? He said. Officer Fallon and some friends, the police chief said, rattling a jar full of coins. We brought more money. Dink held up the cookie tin. This is getting heavy, he said. Great, the man said. Come on back here. The kids and Officer Fallon joined the man at the rear of the firehouse. The man walked over to another one of the doors. He shoved it open and stepped aside. Right in here, he said. Through the door, Dink could see a rug, a TV set, and several comfortable-looking chairs. Where's the bank? Josh asked, peering around the man. Standing in the corner, right where it's always been, the man said, turning to look at the room. Except that the duck bank wasn't standing in the corner. The duck bank wasn't anywhere in the room. Oh man, now we're getting somewhere. Chapter 4. I can't believe it, the man said. That bank was right here last night. I know because I put money in it. Would anyone have moved it to a different spot in the firehouse? Officer Fallon asked. The man shook his head. We kept it here in the TV lounge so everyone would be reminded to drop coins in. Plus, the thing weighs a ton. Officer Fallon handed Josh his jar of coins and took out his notebook. Did you put out the meadow fire last night? He asked. The man shook his head. Nope, that would have been Jake and Lenny. Officer Fallon wrote in his notebook. Where would we find them? The firefighter smiled. Still snoozing in the other room, he said. They should be getting up any time now. Have them give me a call after they're awake, Officer Fallon said, slipping his notebook into his pocket. No problem, the man answered. Officer Fallon and the kids walked outside. Pal lay next to the cruiser with his head on his big front paws. I just thought of something, Dink said. Maybe whoever lit that fire last night did it to get the men out of the firehouse. I had the same thought, Officer Fallon said. The fire could have been a diversion. Yeah, Josh said, so they could sneak in here when no one was around and steal the bank. Who would do such a lousy thing, Ruth Rose said. Someone who loves money and hates ducks, Josh said. Could it have been the car I saw last night? Dink said. I saw those headlights right before the fire. Very possibly, Officer Fallon said. An elderly man walked past with a dog on a leash. The man was tall and thin. The dog was short and round. They both had white hair. Pal whined and wagged his tail back and forth. The man let his little dog waddle over to Pal. Hello, the man said. This is Randolph. Is your Basset friendly? Josh nodded. Pal likes everyone. Pal sniffed the little dog, then licked his face. Randolph rolled over and wiggled his whole body. Any trouble here? The man asked, looking curiously at Officer Fallon. Just investigating a possible theft, Officer Fallon said. The man raised his bushy white eyebrows. Would it have anything to do with that crazy driver I saw last night? He asked. Officer Fallon took out his notebook again and flipped it open. Please, tell me what you saw, he said. A fire engine woke me sometime after 1 o'clock, the man said, so I took Randolph outside for some fresh air. We were on the corner of Indian Way Road when a Jeep came tearing past us up Main Street. The man held his hands a foot apart. Miss Randolph by that much. Officer Fallon began writing in his notebook. You are Mr. Thaddeus Pocket, the man said. Number 10 Indian Way Road. Were you able to read the Jeep's license plate, Mr. Pocket? Mercy, no, the man said. It was speeding much too fast. Did you happen to notice the driver? Officer Fallon asked. Mr. Pocket shook his head. I'm sorry, my eyesight isn't wonderful anymore. There were 2 men in the Jeep, but I don't remember the driver. Officer Fallon closed his notebook and began to put it away. Thanks anyway, Mr. Pocket. You've been very helpful. But I do remember the man sitting beside the driver, Mr. Pocket went on. You do? Officer Fallon opened his notebook. Mr. Pocket grinned. Yes, but only because he was so odd-looking. The man in the passenger seat looked just like a giant duck. And that's the end of that chapter. So why would the person sitting in the passenger seat look like a giant duck? Maybe it was a giant duck sitting in the passenger seat, if you catch my drift. Let's read chapter 5 too. Chapter 5. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose exchanged glances. Officer Fallon was still looking at Mr. Pocket. The man looked like a duck? Can you explain, Mr. Pocket? Mr. Pocket smiled. I noticed a shiny head and a duck's beak. Now I realize the man must have had a shaved head and a large nose. Officer Fallon thanked Mr. Pocket and wrote down his phone number. The man and his dog continued their walk. That guy driving the Jeep must have been the thief, Josh blurted out. The duck bank was in the passenger seat. When Mr. Pocket saw the Jeep, the driver had probably just stolen the bank and was making his getaway, Ruth Rose added. Officer Fallon walked over to his cruiser. I'll get the word out to watch out for a Jeep carrying a duck, he said. Would you mind holding on to our money? Dink asked. He stepped over to the cruiser and handed Officer Fallon the cookie tin. And here's yours back, Josh returned Officer Fallon's jar. Will do, Officer Fallon said, setting both containers on the seat. Don't worry, we'll get our duck bridge built yet. He climbed into the car and pulled away down Main Street. That crook could be anywhere by now, Dink said. He started walking toward the corner of Main Street and River Road. It makes me so mad, Ruth Rose said. The town has been saving up for a year, and now we have to start all over again. The kids crossed River Road and sat in the grass above the riverbank. Pal woofed at a family of ducks feeding in the weeds. The ducks paddled quickly away toward the other side. Maybe Officer Fallon will find him, Dink said. I don't know how, Josh said. That Jeep could be hundreds of miles away by now. Well, we still have this, Ruth Rose said, holding up the chunk of wood stamped with ETCO. These letters must mean something. Josh picked up a stone and tossed it into the river. The kids watched the stone sink to the sandy bottom. Any ideas? Dink asked. Yeah, let's go to Ellie's, Josh said. A milkshake always helps me think better. Josh, we have to focus on finding that money, Ruth Rose said. Think of those baby ducks. Okay, but we don't have a plan, Josh said. Dink checked his watch. Why don't we see if the firemen who were on duty last night are up yet, he suggested. Good idea, Ruth Rose said. Maybe we saw the Jeep when they were coming back from the fire. With Pal leading, the kids walked back to the fire station. A tall man was wiping the rescue truck with a cloth. A mug of coffee rested on the truck's hood. Morning, he said, yawning. Good morning, Dink said. Are you one of the night firemen? Did you hear about the robbery? Josh asked before the man could answer Dink's question. The man nodded. My name's Jake, he said. I'm really bummed that someone stole that duck money. And here's Jake. He picked up his coffee and sat on the truck's front bumper. Lenny and I were gone putting out the fire in the meadow. It turned out to be small, probably left by burning by some campers. Officer Fallon thinks the crooks set it, Josh said. We figure they did it to get you to leave the firehouse, Dink said. I saw some headlights near where the fire was set last night. And a man walking up his street saw a Jeep speeding up Main Street, Ruth Rose added. He saw the duck bank in the Jeep. Jake's mouth fell open. Really? By any chance, did you pass a Jeep on River Road? Josh asked. Jake shook his head. Didn't see any vehicles going or coming back. Did you see anyone hanging around here? Ruth Rose asked. Jake leaned down and gave Pal's ears a gentle rub. Not last night, but a few days ago some guy was poking around in here. He used the bathroom, then left. Did he see the duck bank? Dink asked. Probably. The thing's pretty hard to miss, Jake said. Do you remember what he looked like? Josh asked. Jake shrugged. Big guy, as tall as me, but heavier, he said. Oh, and his ears really stuck out. Looked like he had 2 overgrown mushrooms glued to his head. Well, that's a weird description, so now we need to be on the lookout for someone really tall and big with giant ears sticking out. That's crazy. Let's read maybe one more chapter in this part. Chapter 6. The kids thanked Jake and left. That guy could have been the robber, Ruth Rose said. I think so too, Dink said. The thief would have to be big to carry that duck filled with coins. Now can I get a milkshake? Josh asked. Please, I'm starving. If you promise not to slurp and embarrass us, Dink said. With Pal tugging on his leash, they walked toward Main Street and Ellie's diner. They sat in the booth by the windows. Pal crawled under the table and rested his head on Josh's feet. Hi, kids, Ellie said. She brought Pal a bowl of water and patted him on the head. Then she pulled out her pad. What'll it be? Our specials are slug stew and spider spaghetti. Yum, Ruth Rose said. But Josh simply has to have a milkshake. She pulled the ETCO wood from her back pocket and laid it on the table. What's that? Asked Ellie. It's a clue, Ruth Rose said. Did you hear about the duck bank? It got stolen last night. Go on, Ellie said. She sat next to Dink. Tell me everything. The kids told Ellie about the fire, the speeding Jeep, and what they'd learned from Jake at the firehouse. This came from the fire, Ruth Rose said, touching the chunk of wood. We've been trying to figure out what ETCO stands for. Ellie picked up the wood and examined the letters. Suddenly, she smiled and handed it back to Ruth Rose. Well, that's a part of the mystery I can solve. Come on out back, she said. Stay, Josh told Pal. Then the kids followed Ellie behind the counter, through the kitchen and out the back door. Ellie walked over to a small wooden platform lying on the ground. It was made of narrow boards that had been nailed across thicker ones. I've never seen those before, Josh said. I've seen those before, Josh said. When my dad ordered a bunch of bricks, they came loaded on one of those things. It's called a pallet, Ellie said. Look, Ruth Rose said. She pointed to the words stamped into the pallet. Eastern Pallet Company. So the wood came from one of these pallets. So we should think about where somebody could get one of those. Ruth Rose held her partly burned piece of wood next to the words. The black printing was identical. Where do they make these things? Dink asked. Beats me, Ellie said. This one came from the supermarket. I'm using the wood to build a fence around my garden. Could anyone get one? Ruth Rose asked. Ellie shrugged. I guess. I talked to the store manager, a guy named Derek Robb. So, do you still want milkshakes? Yes, Josh said. He led the way back to the diner. The kids gave Ellie their orders, then slid back into the booth. Ruth Rose leaned toward Dink and Josh. I'll bet that crook used pallets from the supermarket to start the fire, she said. If he did, maybe Derek Robb remembers him, Dink said. So let's go and ask, Ruth Rose suggested. Can we please drink our milkshakes first? Josh asked. And that's the end of that chapter. So we're about halfway through. So I think I'll stop here for this part. So it looks like the wood that was set on fire to distract people came from the supermarket. So they're going to go to the supermarket and figure out who has access to those pallets. Wonder if you guys have any suspects yet. You probably do. You always have some sort of suspect. Well, tune in next time to see the end of the Quicksand Question. See you then.